We're here today with Dr. Ronald Graeser. He's running for Congress in the 2nd District of Michigan. Doctor, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what makes you interested in the 2nd District congressional seat.
Thank you. I appreciate being able to be on your site. I'm a practicing physician, board certified in family practice, and right now I'm working what's called locum tenens, which means you help out at this clinic and that clinic that need help. Unhappily, because of Michigan's economy, I've been working for the last 2 years in Indiana. So I have a little incentive that way. I'd like to start working in Michigan more. But on the more serious side, I graduated from the University of Arizona in electrical engineering and worked in that field for a little while. Then went to Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan to get some pre-medical subjects so that I could go to medical school. I graduated from the Chicago College of Osteopathic Medicine in 1970 and finished an internship in Grand Rapids, and after a brief stint in Wisconsin, came to Newaygo County, Michigan, where I've lived since 1972. I've practiced in general practice in Newaygo and Fremont. I was medical examiner for Newaygo County in Michigan and Lake County and Osceola County, and I did consulting in forensic pathology for about a total of 23 years. After that, I went back into clinical medicine, which means treating patients instead of examining dead people. And I've worked in emergency rooms, occupational medicine, and now locum tenens. I and my wife, my first wife, with whom I'm still married, have 3 grown daughters who are successfully pursuing their own lives. I've been interested in politics since I was 18. Those of you who are in my age group remember when who were men. Remember when you were 18 you were liable for the draft. So that makes you interested when you see wars going on and they're telling you you're going to go fight the war whether you want to or not. That you suddenly have a personal interest in who's running the show. I have seen, I think, our country degrade from one that was based on its founding principles to one that's based on whatever they can trick the people into doing. I'm running for a federal office, so I'm espousing the federal principles. State is a different ballgame. State, if you want to issue dog licenses, okay, that's within the purview of the state. The federal government's not supposed to be doing that sort of thing. The federal government is limited in its constitution to doing very specific things, and in the 10th Amendment it says, and by the way, anything else the federal government may not do, but the states may do it, or the individual persons still have their own power to do it. This nation has fought wars since 1950, so that's about 62 years now. 4 wars, 4 major wars. Korea, which they called a police action. Do you ever wonder why they called it a police action? Well, back then they actually had a little feel for the Constitution. They said we can't fight a war without declaring war because the Constitution says we have to declare war. So we'll call it a police action. And that was kind of a sick joke until about 15 years ago when Congress finally said, you know, that was war, and the men and women who fought in it should be entitled to war benefits. And so they said that was a war, and officially it's a war now. Vietnam was another war, and they called it a war at the time. And now we've had the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War, and a lot of conflicts in between. So we fought 4 major wars and never declared war. That's against the Constitution. That's also illogical. We're turning this nation into a dictatorship. We pretty much let the president do whatever he wants, and maybe Congress will go along, maybe not. He does it anyways. An example of that is executive orders. The first one was made by George Washington when he ordered the Army to do a certain thing. As Commander-in-Chief, he had every legal right to do that. But now we have executive orders that have nothing to do with the military, and the presidents, all of them, both the Democrat and Republican, it just write a law and it's done. You don't have to worry about Congress and all that. That's got to stop. That's dictatorship. That's totalitarianism. We have a federal government that tells us how many gallons of water we can use to flush our toilets. That's not the purpose of the federal government. They have no constitutional right to do that. So my desire if I were in, I would try to do it, or at least I'd do as much as I could, is to restrain the government, to take away all these things that it's doing, for instance, to the Department of Education. Nothing in the Constitution about that. That's a state. Actually, it's the individual's purview. It's the individual's responsibility to raise their children and train them. If they want to group together to make private schools, that's one thing. The state can step in legally. It's not against the U.S. Constitution, at least, but the federal government has nothing to do with it. So if I had my way, I would be chairman of the committee to repeal laws. And we would repeal laws like crazy. And if we got all the laws repealed that are unconstitutional, you wouldn't have all this debate about taxes, because there would hardly be any taxes. That's the whole sum of it, really, to restrict, to get the federal government back to its original constitutional duties.
Talk about war in Iran. Should we go?
I don't know. I'll try to be honest with you on that. You know, I don't know enough about it. They say they're developing nuclear weapons. I suppose they are. And they definitely would like to wipe a lot of people out. Certainly they've said that we definitely want to kill all the Jews, get rid of the Israeli state. Occasionally they say we want to get rid of the other Satan called the United States on the other side of the Atlantic. I don't know how to, I don't have a lot of answers for that sort of thing. And I don't have a lot of time to study it. But if you're a congressman, then you have this full-time job. But I like, and that's why I'm not going to try to say, vote for me because I'm going to do this or that, except that I'm going to try and get rid of the laws. If you vote for me, it will be to return constitutional government. And any decisions that are made will be made on what's constitutional and what's best for America. And one of the things that would be nice for America is not to be taking the wealth of the people who are earning it and giving it to whatever dictator the current administration wants to ingratiate themselves with.
Talk about education a little bit more. You brought up the idea that there shouldn't be a Department of Education. Where should it revolve around? The state, the county, the localities? How should that, who's the best person to go ahead and decide how children get educated, and how do we pay for that?
Well, a lot of people are deciding, and I rather agree with them, my daughter being one, that the best person to educate their children is the parents. And so we have home schools. And they're forming together. You know, if anybody has the interest of a kid, it's the parents. I mean, they're a natural. You really mustn't expect somebody in Washington to think that they care more about your children than you do. That's absurd. So the main responsibility is the parent. If they wouldn't, and I see it best, and I'm seeing it happening, and I've seen it since it started. I think it was in the 70s that homeschooling really started to take off. That the parents will group together when they see a need. They group together and get together and solve it amongst themselves. Up until I believe it was the 50s in Michigan, there were little schools all over the place. There's one 3 miles from our house, and it just was a little school with probably 8 grades. The people who graduated then seem to have done quite well educationally, so I think it works. But the more you get control and money and power away from the individual, the more the individual suffers, as I have seen it in my experience.
Now, you've been a doctor since 1970, and it was right around that time that we started the war on drugs. Has that failed?
Oh, I don't think there's any question, but it's failed. I always kid well, I don't kid, but I actually am quite serious about it. Doctors are being put in jail today for illegally ordering drugs. I don't know if you know that, but I've defended one, and let me give you 2 examples, if I may. The first one I defended, the federal government indicted him on 13 counts of being a drug dealer. Now, the elements of that case are you have to prove that the person gave drugs to somebody for no medical reason. This doctor never gave one drug to anybody. He wrote prescriptions. And in every case, because I reviewed the records, I was the expert witness for him. In every case, he did a beautiful job of documenting why the person needed these narcotics. And they weren't the heaviest narcotics either. They were moderate narcotics. One of the patients, for instance, had cancer. So the federal government, it was indicted him and was going to try him in Lansing, and a lawyer whom I had worked with asked if I would help, so I looked at it. I'd look at one case, I'd have to get up and walk around my office a few times to cool off because it made me so mad. It took me a long time to review the cases. And when I was through reviewing them, I went to the lawyer whom I knew pretty well, and I said, "What's going on here? This guy didn't do anything wrong. This is better than I do." And he said, "Well, I've been talking to my friends in Detroit, and they say that this prosecutor, if she can put enough doctors in prison, she'll get a judgeship." So that's one aspect of it. In another aspect, a doctor who was in a clinic with other doctors and treated pain, because most doctors are saying, we don't want anything to do with the narcotics. We don't have time to be fighting the federal government, the state government, and everybody else. So there's groups now that are pain clinics, and they specialize in pain. There was a doctor in Big Rapids, and this was about 10 years ago, who prescribed some pain medicines, strong pain medicines, for a grandmother who needed them. Her grandson stole the drugs. He and his friend had a little party, and his friend OD'd and died. So the prosecutor of that county prosecuted the doctor for murder. This is what's going on with your drug laws. Before 1911, there were no drug laws. If you wanted an ounce of opium, you gave your little girl a 50-cent piece, silver, it was worth a lot more than. Goes down to the drugstore, buys an ounce, and brings it back. Then they passed the drug laws. And now we're putting people in prison and harassing them. My feeling is, if they want to do drugs, let them do drugs, but then don't expect us to pay for the problems. And about 5 years ago, I got a call from an editor, as it turns out, of a marijuana magazine advocating the use of marijuana in California. And he said, "I've heard about your stand. I'm really interested. What do you think?" We talked back and forth. He's really gung-ho. And I said, "But you realize that if you OD on heroin and you come into the emergency room, you can't expect the farmer with 5 kids to pay your bill." And there was a silence, and that was the end of the conversation. A lot of the druggies want it both ways. But you've got to be willing to let people die if they do something stupid, and not make the people who are leading sensible lives pay for the mistakes of others. So you can't have privileges without responsibility, and that's where part of the problem comes in.
Talk about Obamacare. Is that a good thing, or is that something that's going to cause even more problems than we have right now?
I tell patients, again, you are going to be amazed at how bad Obamacare is going to be. You're going to see things you never dreamed of. Well, let me give you an example, because I've worked in the military as a doctor. In one 2-week stint, I was mostly in the reserves. In one 2-week stint, I was at Fitzsimmons General Hospital in Denver, in the basement, treating outpatient clinics. So this 14-year-old girl was brought in. She was so weak she couldn't sit up. They had to carry her in. And after I worked her up, the problem was she was having periods that were way out of control. She was terribly anemic. She needed a transfusion even. And she needed a DNC and whatever that showed. So I called up to the 4th floor where obstetrics and gynecology was, and I said, "Here's the problem. I think she needs admitted." The doctor on charge said, "Yes, sir, you're right. Send her on up." I said, "Thank you." So I went out in the hall and I called the sergeant in charge. I said, "This is the deal. Put her on a gurney, take her up. She's too weak. She can't sit in a wheelchair. Just lay her on a gurney." He said, "I'm sorry, sir, we don't have any gurneys." I said, "This is a hospital. You don't have any gurneys?" He said, "Well, no, sure, that's not entirely true. That's not entirely true. We do have gurneys on the 4th floor." I said, "That's great. That's where I'm sending her. Have the 4th floor, send the gurney down, put her on it, take her back up." He said, "I'm sorry, sir, it's against the rules." That's government medicine. There are things that happen that you just can't believe. And that's what you're going to have. It'll take a few years, but that's what you're going to have.
So essentially, we're going to have a situation where more people are paying into the system for health care and actually receiving less health care out the other end than we're getting right now.
Oh, there's no question. Yeah.
What do we do about that? How do we solve that problem?
Well, first of all, get rid of the politicians who are trying to enslave us. There are problems in medical care. One of the biggest ones that nobody talks about anymore is malpractice. This not only raises the cost by insurance premiums, and there are places, for instance, in West Virginia, I don't know if it's true this year, but about 5 years back, there were no obstetricians left in West Virginia. If you wanted to deliver and lived in, like, I think it's Huntington, West Virginia, you went across the river to Ohio, and that's where you had your baby. And the people in the interior would just go to GPs or nurse practitioners. And that's kind of funny in Michigan too. We have a lot of nurse practitioners who deliver, or midwives, I'm sorry, midwives who deliver babies. We didn't used to have that when I first started. And because of the wonderful things that the legal community has done to us to make healthcare better, we have very few doctors delivering babies, and now it's midwives who have spent a couple years learning how to do it. So instead of having a doctor who had spent 4 years in medical school, a year in internship, 4 years in residency, we now have a midwife who spent 2 years. So that's how much the legal care has helped us on that. Now I got myself lost. Where was I going? Oh, the malpractice. So it's not just the cost of the premiums, because some doctors just leave the specialty. They can't afford the premiums anymore. You have to deliver your first 500 babies just to pay the insurance premiums. But it affects the way medicine is practiced. I'm amazed. I'm seeing patients who have come to the emergency room, and then I get the records. They say, I've got a headache, to the emergency room doctor. He orders an MRI of the brain. That's about $1,600. I mean, that's the first test. We used to examine the patient first, and then you look for simple things like maybe a wry neck or perhaps infection in the sinuses that's causing it. But because of the malpractice, if he doesn't do that, he can be successfully sued. And you say, well, he can take the risk, but actually he can't, because almost all the emergency rooms now are run by corporations that hire the doctors, and they go through the records and they say, doctor, you don't order MRIs like we told you. You're out of a job. We'll get a doctor who does what we say. So the premium, the cost is being jacked up because on the first visit you have to get the diagnosis right and the treatment right. Otherwise you can be successfully sued. So you order every test you can possibly think of. You go to, well, I had a friend who went to an emergency room a month ago. He was calling me. He said, I can't believe it. His kid got a little cut on his chin. Bill, sick, and this was at Shelby Hospital in Michigan, Lakeside, I think it's called. The bill was $1,600 to put in 3 stitches. That's bizarre, and it has a lot to do with the malpractice.
So we need some tort reform.
No question about it. And you know what they've done? You would say, well, you know, we have to change it somehow. Just make it the way it used to be in the 50s. It used to be, and when I went to medical school, they taught me this because this was standard misinformation. A doctor, for instance, if you're a doctor in a town of 5,000 and you're a general practitioner and all you've had is that much education, and you make a mistake in treating an eye, they have to find another doctor in order to testify against you and say it was malpractice. They have to find another doctor in a town of 5,000 of similar training who will testify against you. I know of a doctor who was in that situation, and instead of having another doctor from a town of 5,000, they went to a retinologist in Washington, D.C. and got him to testify against him. Now, this guy is not just a specialist. He's not just an ophthalmologist who spent 4 extra years. He spent a fellowship besides in just the retina. And he says, well, you should have done this and this. Well, they've changed the rules. The judges and whatnot have changed the rules of submitting evidence. That testimony should have never been allowed, and it wouldn't have been allowed in 1950s or before. So you've got to go back to the old rules of evidence. That would help an awful lot.
Let's get on to another topic here that's really closely related. Medical marijuana. They recently passed a law in Michigan allowing people to have marijuana for medical use. Good idea?
Well, it sort of goes along with my thinking about drugs in general. If they want to do it, let them do it. The advantage to being able to grow your own is that it's cheaper. But you can get it in liquid form where you can take it orally. People don't realize this, and I didn't realize it either until I did autopsies on 2 middle-aged men in their 30s who their families told me were heavy marijuana smokers. Their lungs were shot. And so I was at a meeting later where they were talking about, a couple of years later, they were talking about pulmonary disease, and at the end, do you have any questions? I said, yeah, I've got one. I noticed this. What do you think? He said, oh, the speaker who was an expert in pulmonology said, yeah, that's absolutely true. Marijuana is death on lungs. I've never seen lungs worse, not even in an 80-year-old man who had smoked all his life. These lungs were like shredded. I don't know how they stayed alive with them. So it's a dangerous thing to smoke marijuana.
The environment. What can the federal government do to prevent things from happening to the environment that have happened in the past? And everybody that lives in Muskegon County in the 2nd District is familiar with a company called Hooker Chemical that literally dumped its wastes in White Lake, and it's taken a long, long time for White Lake to get cleaned up, and I'm not sure it's ever going to be back to where it was before. What do we do to prevent that from happening so we don't have the cleanup problems afterwards?
Well, I'm no expert in how to clean up things, but I'm told there are ways. A little bit of it is a little overkill, I think. Back then, I guess, I was just a kid when all this really bad stuff was happening, and I don't think people much thought about it. Nobody even thought it was that much of a problem. So I don't know how you prevent it if you don't even realize it's a problem. But if you do realize it's a problem, then you can tell them not to do it. You could force them to clean it up if you discover that they are doing what's wrong or what's damaging. Of course, you have to be careful how you write your laws, too. The Smoky Mountains, I'm told, have, I think it's nitrous emissions that they put all the catalytic converters on, but yet in the Smoky Mountains, I'm told just the trees put out more than any cars, and it's at certain times of the year it's worse in Smoky Mountains than it was in Los Angeles. So I think you got to be careful to try and expect the air coming out of the car to be purer than the air coming into the carburetor. There's got to be some common sense, perhaps.
What do we do with Social Security? There's going to be a situation that's already started where the baby boomers are going to be retiring, and we're going to get to a point where pretty much all the baby boomers are going to be retired at once, and there's simply not the numbers younger than them to keep the Social Security system afloat. What's going to happen with that? How do we take care of that problem?
I think, first of all, you've got to realize that it's largely in that problem because the federal government has taken all the money out of Social Security, left IOUs, and used it to buy votes and to make friends with foreign dictators. If that hadn't happened, I don't think we'd have quite the problem we have. I mean, obviously we wouldn't have quite the problem we have. The federal government has forced people to pay into it, and the federal government should make sure that they still get reimbursed the way the original contract was set up, even though, and many people may not realize this, the Supreme Court has said there is no obligation whatever for the federal government to do that. But as a matter of moral principle, they should. And by the way, I'm receiving Social Security, so I've got a vested interest in this. I rather like the little bit that I hear of it, of Ryan's plan, to let those who want to go private, and those who want to go in a federal system go federal. You know, the advantage of going private is that when you finally die, there's usually some money left, and that goes into your estate. When you die with Social Security, the first of the marriage people gets, the one who's left, the wife who's left, gets $240 to, I don't know what she's supposed to do with it because it costs more than that to bury somebody. When she dies, there's no money from Social Security. They don't even give you that. So there's a real advantage to having a privatized system. Now,
what do we do about foreign threats? We've had problems in this country where we've established a Department of Homeland Security. We've passed a Patriot Act. And God forbid if you end up at an airport, you're probably going to get strip searched. How do we go ahead and take care of that problem so we have the America we grew up with is not the America of today? How do we get it back to where it's safe and sound?
That really involves a lot of things. Dr. Ron Paul said, if you keep pricking and irritating a rattlesnake long enough, it's going to try to bite you. I still go to military and medical meetings and get to talk with doctors who are still active duty. you've heard of Delta Force, you've heard of SEALs. Well, I've sat at dinners where, you know, a doctor next to me who's either a doctor for that group or whatever. And when a wife sees her Delta Force sergeant go off to work, you know, the military for the most part is like an 8-hour day, most of the part, except when you're in combat, then it's a whole different ballgame. So she says goodbye in the morning at 5 when he leaves, and he might not come back for 2 months because he gets there and they say, hey, we got this business in Panama that we're doing, and away he goes and kills people in Panama. And that's well known. They go all over the world to kill people that our rulers don't want. And then sometimes he doesn't come back too. So, and when he comes back, his wife can't ask, I mean, she can ask, but she's not going to get any answers of what happened or where he went. And occasionally a couple officers from the Army come in and say, we're sorry, ma'am, your husband's been killed. We can't tell you where, and we don't have the body anymore, but you've got to move out. We'll help you move out. Because you can't stay on post, you know, it's only for people who are in the Army. So we are causing a lot of chaos and hell around the world, some of it unbeknownst to people, to the citizens here. I can remember watching some late night shows. They were showing the SEALs and how they went with them somehow. I got footage where they attacked it wasn't a meth, it was where they were making cocaine down in South America, and they sneak up on them and they said, and they kill everybody. And then later on the program they said, and at these labs, the people who are working and making it work and their families live nearby. So we've got 50 SEALs going in and killing whole families in Panama. And I'm pretty sure that's true because of what I've talked to the doctors who sit next to me at dinner. I'm surprised anybody allows us to even enter their country as tourists. So I think we've got to stop trying to run the world. Our rulers, I believe, want to run the world. I believe they have turned this country into the Rome of the 20th century. And they're using its power and influence to carry out their ideals. So, first of all, I think we should follow George Washington's suggestions and stop trying to rule the world. That would help a whole lot. The Homeland Security, in many aspects, is a total farce. As an example, before they allowed the pilots to carry guns, they said, oh, we can't do that. What if he shoots and a hole goes through the airplane? Air will leak out. Well, I don't know, it would leak out very fast. But the option was, because they weren't carrying guns, the option was that the terrorists would be able to take over the plane, and then we'd send up an F-16 and machine gun it with 50 caliber bullets. So instead of having a 38 maybe punching a couple holes, we're going to shoot it down. I mean, it was so bizarre and so stupid. It's unbelievable that they even would say it. My idea, and this is sort of a joke, is if you want to save the planes, you have a big barrel of loaded 45s, and every passenger that goes to get on, you hand them one. And at the end, they hand them back. No planes will be taken over, but in reality, no planes are going to be taken over in this country again, as long as there's an American man on that plane, because they're not going to get away with it anymore.
Immigration. We seem to have a situation where people think they can just literally walk into the country or run into the country without any permission of the government. What do we do to curb the illegal immigration? How's the best way to handle that? Yeah,
you know, there's one part, and I keep reading it, I can't quite believe it, but they say one of the complaints is when people commit, illegal immigrants commit crimes in here, we should deport them. And I'm thinking, the guy committed murder and we deport him? Don't you punish him for the crime? And then maybe deport him 10 or 20 years later, or if he's a dead body, send the body back. So I'm a little puzzled on really what's going on that. I think the first thing we should do is enforce the law, as I've been asked many different times. What should we do about breaking the law? Well, how about enforcing it? I can remember being in a prison once. I worked at a couple prisons, and we had inmate nurses who, when all the patients were done, were sitting around talking about how to beat the speed traps. You drag a chain, you put up aluminum foil, and I listened for about 5 minutes, and I said, I found a way. I have never gotten a ticket. And they said, how? You know, everybody's sitting there watching, how? I said, I obey the speed limit. It seems to me laws are supposed to be obeyed, so I think we should enforce them. if people are here illegally, by illegally, that means they're not supposed to be here, and so you should pack them up and send them home. And you say, oh, we're going to split the families of the kids who were born there. No, we're not splitting the families. The kids can go too. There's no reason why they can't go. They're citizens of the home country too. And I was just reading that it's in California. Read some statistics on that. I'm not going to remember them all, but it was huge figures. A third of all the prisoners in the prisons are illegal immigrants. And I believe they said 90% of the homicides are committed by illegal immigrants. And they just went down the list of crimes that are committed, and it's predominantly by illegal immigrants. We've got to stop it. I think the wall was a good idea. Like, probably be a good idea to finish it. The Israelis are doing very well with their wall.
You said earlier, enforce the laws we have. Should the laws be tailored to the way they used to be, to where if there was a victim, there was a crime, and then you got punished for what you did because there was a victim involved? And should we just focus on those laws instead of laws where there's no victim and nobody, no individual person or representative of a corporation can step up to the plate and say, John Smith did something to damage me, and therefore I want the prosecutor to prosecute? If that individual isn't there to institute the prosecution, should there even be a law against whatever it is that the Congress or the states have passed a law against?
Well, if I understand you right, then a person who was murdered couldn't be there, and so that wouldn't be prosecuted.
Well, the murder would be, obviously there's a victim there.
Yeah.
The victim might not be saying much, but there's a victim there.
Okay.
So we actually have a victim. We actually have something, that a flesh and blood victim that would be able to, maybe not be able to say anything, but there's evidence of a victim.
Oh, okay. And I'm sorry, but I'm not quite sure what the question is.
Well, how do we go ahead and, you talked earlier about government being out of control. And one of the ways I think government gets out of control is by passing a bunch of laws to have, let's say, if you don't wear a seatbelt now, you can get a ticket for that. If you don't have a driver's license, you can get a ticket for that. If you're smoking marijuana, you can get arrested for that. There's laws out there for purposes like revenue enhancement, because the only way you're going to quote unquote get out of any of that stuff is to fork over some dollars to the state. And I realize you're running for Congress, but there's still things, the federal government already is getting into every portion of our lives it can possibly get its tentacles into. Couldn't it also say to the states that, look, you can't do these certain things because they're just not right to do?
Laws should be only to restrict and restrain evil, not to promote good. And the seatbelt law is, we're going to promote good. That doesn't work. The 1.5 gallon per flush toilet law is, we're going to promote good. That's not restraining evil. And I don't think promoting good laws should be passed. That's not the function of government. And their good is not always correct either.
Could there be ulterior motives as to why they're doing this?
There probably is every time. I think they want to control our lives completely and make us absolute slaves. I think they really like people to adore them, to clap for them, to send them money, to have to come beg for favors because they've passed. You know, it always gets me. And Hoekstra did this, but I don't know what his motive was. But he helped local businessmen, the orchard people especially. They were having some kind of problem, and by getting some exemption to the federal law, they were able to make it. Well, he passes the law to give them trouble, and then he's the hero when he gets them exempted from the law that he helped pass. So it gives a lot of power to the politicians. You come to me with the right attitude, and I'll help you out. And they just pass more and more laws. And you know what's even worse? Nobody knows what the laws are. They pass them by the hundreds of thousands every year. Nobody could even read them if they sat down and did nothing but read the laws. None of us can understand it the way it's read. If we could read it, we'd never be able to remember them. This is tyranny. This is how you set up there's two ways to have a totalitarian government. One is to have a king. Whatever he says is law. It's law now, but it's not law now. And he rules. The other is to pass a law for every activity under the sun and just selectively enforce it against the people you don't like. Both are tyranny, and we're heading in the other way.
Second Amendment. I take it you're a strong defender and believer of the Second Amendment.
Yeah, there's no question about that. You know, when I was in high school, we actually, as part of physical education in high school, we had a course in riflery. We'd buy a box of ammunition, 22 ammunition, and they had a range, and we learned safety and how to shoot. That was the way it was back then. And I'm told the federal government, under the Defense Acts, actually subsidized that because they wanted all young men to know how to shoot so they could be good soldiers. People have said, and I think it's very true, that because of the Second Amendment, we can have the freedoms we have. And the Second Amendment was not set up for hunting and such by our forefathers. It was set up, you read what they say, when governments become terribly oppressive and nothing else can be done, the people have the right, some people even say the duty, to overthrow that government. So the idea was everybody could be armed and overthrow the government if it needed to be overthrown. Of course, if they're armed that way and the politicians realize what's going on, they won't push so hard, so hopefully they'll never reach that point where it turns to violence. There was a time it was about 2 years after, and I don't remember the names, but there was a conclave, admirals and generals from Japan and America got together for sort of a talk over old times, if you will, sort of like maybe the Confederates and the Union soldiers used to get together and have dinners. So the one top American general was talking to the Japanese top general, and he said, "Why didn't you attack us after Pearl Harbor? We were wide open. We had no defenses on the West Coast. You could have just marched right in." And the Japanese general said, "Well," he said, "I knew that in America, every other household has a hunting rifle. And I also knew that they had contests to see who was the best shot." He said there was no way I was going to put my troops in there. And in the 1300s, one of the kings of England passed a rule that every household had to have a sword, so that if they were invaded, he could immediately raise up a militia and fight. He wasn't afraid of his own subjects. When you've got to disarm your subjects because you're afraid of them, that's tyranny. The only people who do that are tyrants.
The U.S. Supreme Court, it seems like every time that there's an appointment, it gets more and more polarized. And I'm thinking from even Robert Bork is the first name that comes to mind back when Reagan was president. But before that, it happened, and after that, it's happened. What's wrong with the political process when we can't get a Supreme Court judge nominated and then confirmed by the Senate, who's basically somebody that is supposed to interpret the laws impartially without regard to what the particular law is?
Well, I think the left is most guilty of it, but maybe if I were a leftist, I could point to the right, to the conservatives, and say they're doing the same thing. The left knows what they're doing when they get these so-called liberal judges in place. They know that from past experience and from interviewing them, that they are not going to pay any attention to the Constitution. They're going to say what looks liberal, what looks the way we want it to be, and they're going to vote that way regardless. It has nothing to do with the law. And probably one of the most egregious examples was one of the Supreme Court justices who partially based his opinion on a law in an African country. He should be impeached. It's by design. There's no question that they're putting people in there who will do what is ideologically correct and not what the law says, not what the Constitution says.
So essentially, if I'm getting your message loud and clear, the problem is that the Constitution in this country is not being respected or followed. And if it was, we wouldn't be in most of the messes that we're in right now, both as a nation and then in relationship to other nations throughout the world.
That's my opinion. And it would also promote more morality in this country. When you pass laws, for instance, that say, we will give an unwed mother money she will have all the health care she wants food and clothing and housing as long as she keeps the husband out of the house. You are promoting immorality. And then on the other hand, you say, if two people are not married but living together, they get taxed at a lower rate than if they're married and living together in holy matrimony. Our laws, many of our laws, are passed to promote immorality and to discourage a moral life.
The Federal Reserve, it's something that when you really study it, it's not federal and there are no reserves. Should that be abolished and should we go back to a gold standard?
We should definitely go to a gold standard. And you're right, what you say about the Federal Reserve is exactly right. They carefully chose the name. You know, federal, so everybody would say, oh, it's part of the government. Well, it's not, fellas. They're printing money and then charging interest on something that really didn't exist. And the gold standard prevents inflation. When your monetary unit is tied to a fixed commodity, which basically gold is, it can't be inflated. There was a period in Britain, I'm told, from about 1300 to 1600 when basically they used gold standard. It was gold and silver coins. The price of a loaf of bread stayed constant over 300 years. Just in my lifetime, I've seen, for instance, the price of gas go from 25 cents to, it's now $3.80. And that's basically inflation. The price of gas hasn't gone up. Matter of fact, if you take the 25 cents that I had, which was silver back then, 90% silver, that is now worth a quarter of $24, $6. That's worth $6 just in the silver content. So actually, the price of gas has gone from a quarter to probably, if we were still in silver coins, to probably about 20 cents. The actual price has gone down, but because our money is inflated, it looks like it costs more. And I can imagine that the Arabs kind of got ticked off about that, and that's why in 1970 they said, we're going to start raising the price to match your inflation.
What's your outlook for the country for the next 10 to 20 years based on the knowledge and study you've done in your run for Congress today?
Yeah, based from what I've seen and a little bit I read about history, it's not good. I don't think it's going to change. I'm in a very small minority. A lot of the people that I talk to, and quite often my patients will bring it up, seem to think the way I do, but it's not affecting the public life. I'm seeing cartoons in the paper that I can't believe. You know, the funnies. I don't usually get them, but in Indiana, where I'm working right now, somebody brings us Sunday funnies, and I was looking at them. One cartoon started out, the one woman's asking the other one, Sally, so what's this guy like that you're hooking up with? Hooking up with means some guy says, that girl over there, hey buddy, go ask her if she'll have sex with me. And this is being put in our funnies. The morality, at least at the public level, is gone. I honestly think the only way this nation might be saved is if we have an economic collapse, and that's fast coming. The danger will be if you don't have the right people in the houses, in the legislatures, then they're going to turn it into a true dictatorship, like they did with Nazi Germany. If you have people who believe in freedom in the Constitution, then when everything goes down the tubes, at least they will try to maintain our freedoms and our rights.
All right, Doctor, thank you for taking the time to spend with us today. We appreciate it. Good luck in the race in November.
Thank you for your time and help.